Imagine waking up one morning and discovering that everything you thought you knew about your ancestry was only a small piece of a much bigger story. Not just a family tree that traces back a few generations, but a deep, intricate genetic journey spanning thousands of years. One that reveals connections to lost civilizations, ancient migrations, and a history shaped by survival. This is the story of the Ashkenazi Jews, a community whose very DNA holds secrets that science is only now beginning to fully understand. For centuries, the origins of the Ashkenazi Jews have been shrouded in mystery. How did a people with clear genetic ties to the Middle East establish themselves in Europe, creating one of the most intellectually and culturally influential communities in the world? What forces shaped their genetic identity, making them one of the most distinct populations on the planet? These questions have fascinated historians, geneticists, and scholars for decades. And now, through cutting-edge research, we can finally piece together a compelling answer. To understand their story, we have to go back to a time long before Europe, before the medieval settlements of Germany and Poland. The roots of the Ashkenazi Jews trace back to the ancient lands of the Levant, a region that today includes Israel, Palestine, Lebanon, and parts of Syria. Historical and genetic evidence confirms that the ancestors of the Ashkenazi Jews were once part of the great Jewish communities that thrived in the eastern Mediterranean. They lived among the ancient Israelites, worshiping in the Temple of Jerusalem, following the traditions that defined their faith and culture. But history is rarely kind to any one people for too long. The destruction of the Second Temple in 70 CE by the Romans marked a turning point. Jewish populations were scattered across different regions, forced to rebuild their communities in foreign lands. Some moved to North Africa, some to Persia, and others made their way into southern Europe, particularly Italy. From here, a crucial transformation took place, one that would eventually give rise to the Ashkenazi Jews as we know them today. As Jewish families settled in the Roman Empire, they integrated into local economies, often working as traders, merchants, and scholars. Over the centuries, a distinct population began to emerge, carrying Middle Eastern genetic markers, but also picking up influences from the regions they settled in. By the early medieval period, Jewish communities began migrating northward, into what is now Germany and France. These early European Jews, known as Ashkenazim, carved out a unique identity, separate from their Sephardic Jewish counterparts in Spain and North Africa. What's truly fascinating is that despite living among European populations, Ashkenazi Jews remain genetically distinct. Their DNA tells a story of endogamy, marrying within their own community for generations. This practice, often driven by religious and cultural necessity, preserved their Middle Eastern heritage while also creating a new, unique genetic signature. A signature that modern science can now trace with astonishing accuracy. But their migration story wasn't just about movement, it was about survival. Unlike other populations that blended seamlessly into their surroundings, the Ashkenazi Jews faced continuous persecution, restrictions, and forced relocations. From the Crusades to expulsions in England, France, and later Spain, they were constantly uprooted. Each time they were forced to move, they carried their traditions, their language, and their genetics with them, preserving a link to their past even as they adapted to new realities. This genetic continuity is remarkable. Studies show that despite centuries in Europe, the Ashkenazi Jewish gene pool still retains a strong connection to the ancient Middle East. In fact, genetic research has confirmed that modern Ashkenazi Jews share more ancestry with ancient Jewish populations from Israel than with their European neighbors. But here's where things get even more intriguing. While their paternal lineage, traced through Y chromosomes, points overwhelmingly to Middle Eastern origins, their maternal lineage, traced through mitochondrial DNA, tells a slightly different story. Many Ashkenazi maternal genetic markers are European in origin. This has led scientists to believe that, during their early years in Europe, Jewish men married and had children with local European women, who then converted to Judaism. These women became the ancestors of many Ashkenazi Jews, passing down their DNA through generations. It's a discovery that challenges long-held beliefs about Jewish ancestry and adds a new layer of complexity to their genetic identity. But why does this matter? Why does understanding Ashkenazi Jewish genetics go beyond mere curiosity? because their DNA is a living record of history. It tells us how populations move, adapt, and survive. It reveals how cultural identity can be preserved even under the harshest conditions. And for Ashkenazi Jews today, it provides critical insights into hereditary diseases and medical conditions that disproportionately affect their community. For centuries, the origins of the Ashkenazi Jews have been traced through historical records, cultural traditions, and religious texts. But while stories passed down through generations can preserve a sense of identity, they are often shaped by time, interpretation, and even myth. Science, however, tells a different kind of story, one written in the unchangeable code of DNA. Through genetics, we can now confirm what history only suggested. The journey of the Ashkenazi Jews is not just about where they lived, but about how their very DNA was shaped by migrations, upheavals, and survival over 1,000 years. The name Ashkenazi is linked to medieval Jewish communities in Central and Eastern Europe, but long before they spoke Yiddish or settled in cities like Krakow, Prague, and Vilnius, their ancestors had already traveled a vast and complicated path. The story begins in ancient Israel, but it doesn't stay there. Over time, Jewish populations dispersed, creating distinct groups: Sephardic Jews in Spain, Mizrahi Jews in the Middle East, and Ashkenazi Jews in Europe. What made the Ashkenazi journey unique was the way their migration patterns, and the regions they settled in, directly influenced their genetic blueprint. Historical records tell us that by the 4th and 5th century CE, Jewish communities had established themselves in the Roman Empire, particularly in what is now Italy. But unlike other Jewish populations, the ancestors of the Ashkenazi Jews didn't remain there. Instead, they moved northward, entering the Rhineland, the heart of what would become modern-day Germany. Here, Jewish merchants and scholars thrived, developing a cultural and religious identity distinct from their Southern European and Middle Eastern counterparts. But the real transformation came in the Middle Ages. By the 12th and 13th centuries, increasing persecution, including anti-Jewish riots and expulsions, pushed Ashkenazi communities eastward into Poland, Lithuania, and Russia. What followed was an era of both hardship and resilience. While many Jewish communities in Western Europe faced annihilation, those who moved eastward found relative safety under the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth. Here, Ashkenazi Jews flourished, growing in numbers and further solidifying a unique genetic and cultural identity. This movement had a profound impact on their genetic structure. Unlike the Jewish populations of Spain or the Middle East, Ashkenazi Jews lived in isolated communities, often segregated by law or by choice. This meant that, over generations, they married within their own communities, preserving genetic traits that would otherwise have mixed with broader European populations. But there was another factor at play, one that would make their genetic history even more distinct. As their communities expanded, a phenomenon known as the bottleneck effect occurred. This happens when a small population undergoes rapid growth while remaining genetically isolated. Instead of a diverse mix of genetic material, a few founding individuals contribute disproportionately to the gene pool of future generations. This effect explains why modern Ashkenazi Jews, despite numbering in the millions today, can trace their ancestry back to a surprisingly small number of individuals who lived hundreds of years ago. Scientific studies have confirmed this. DNA analysis suggests that the entire Ashkenazi Jewish population today descends from just a few hundred individuals who lived around 700 to 1,000 years ago. This is an astonishing revelation, one that explains why Ashkenazi Jews have such high genetic similarity despite being spread across different countries. It also sheds light on why certain inherited traits, both beneficial and harmful, are more prevalent within the community. One of the most intriguing findings is the balance between genetic continuity and change. While their Y chromosome data confirms a strong paternal lineage linking them to the ancient Middle East, their mitochondrial DNA, passed down through the maternal line, tells a slightly different story. It reveals European influences, particularly from Southern and Central Europe, suggesting that while the earliest Jewish settlers in Europe were men of Middle Eastern descent, they married and had children with local European women who converted to Judaism. This maternal European input became a permanent part of the Ashkenazi genetic identity, shaping the unique DNA signature we see today. This discovery challenges older assumptions about Jewish lineage, particularly the idea that Ashkenazi Jews remained entirely separate from surrounding European populations. Instead, their genetic history is one of adaptation, integration, and selective preservation, keeping core Middle Eastern ancestry intact while also incorporating elements of European heritage. What makes this genetic journey even more remarkable is that, despite facing centuries of displacement, persecution, and even near genocide, the Ashkenazi Jewish gene pool remains one of the most distinct in the world. Today, genetic studies not only confirm their origins, but also help answer deeper questions about migration, adaptation, and the ways in which human populations preserve identity even in the face of history's greatest challenges. Genetics has a way of preserving history in ways that books and records sometimes fail to do. Hidden within the DNA of the Ashkenazi Jews is a silent but undeniable story, a story of isolation, resilience, and a population shaped by one of the most fascinating genetic events in human history. One of the most defining moments in their genetic timeline is something scientists call the bottleneck effect, a phenomenon that would leave an irreversible imprint on their ancestry, making them one of the most genetically unique groups in the world today. To understand this, imagine a vast and diverse population suddenly shrinking to just a few hundred individuals. Whether due to war, disease, persecution, or forced migration, this small surviving group becomes the sole foundation for all future generations. With such limited genetic diversity, the traits of these few individuals become amplified over time. This is exactly what happened to the Ashkenazi Jewish population. Despite their current global numbers, studies show that nearly all Ashkenazi Jews today can trace their ancestry back to a remarkably small group of people who lived between 700 and 1,000 years ago. This genetic bottleneck wasn't the result of a single event but a series of historical pressures that reduced their population repeatedly. From the Crusades to mass expulsions, the Ashkenazi Jews were driven into smaller and smaller communities, often cut off from the broader world. This isolation meant that the survivors passed on their genetic traits to future generations without the usual influx of outside genetic material. Over time, this resulted in an unusually high level of genetic similarity among Ashkenazi Jews, something rarely seen in other populations of similar size. One of the most striking consequences of this is the prevalence of certain inherited genetic markers. Because their ancestors came from such a small group, many Ashkenazi Jews today share specific mutations that are rarely found elsewhere. Some of these mutations are completely harmless, serving as genetic fingerprints of their shared ancestry. Others, however, have medical implications. Scientists have identified more than 20 genetic conditions that are disproportionately common among Ashkenazi Jews, including Tay-Sachs disease, Gaucher disease, and certain forms of breast and ovarian cancer linked to BRCA gene mutations. But genetic isolation isn't just about risk. It also carries unique advantages. Some researchers believe that certain Ashkenazi genetic traits may have been positively selected over generations, contributing to higher-than-average intelligence and cognitive abilities. Studies have explored the possibility that genetic factors played a role in the remarkable achievements of Ashkenazi Jews in fields like mathematics, science, and philosophy. While this remains a topic of debate, what is undeniable is that their history of selective survival and cultural emphasis on scholarship have shaped their collective identity in extraordinary ways. What makes the Ashkenazi genetic bottleneck even more unusual is its sheer speed. In most populations, genetic shifts happen over thousands of years. But for Ashkenazi Jews, this bottleneck effect took place in just a few centuries, creating a level of genetic distinctiveness that is both rare and scientifically invaluable. This rapid genetic shift has allowed researchers to track their lineage with incredible precision, confirming direct links between modern Ashkenazi populations and their ancient ancestors. The study of the Ashkenazi bottleneck has also contributed to broader fields of genetic research. Because their DNA has remained so remarkably consistent over time, it has been used as a model to study how genetic diseases emerge, how populations evolve, and even how specific mutations can be traced through history. In fact, Ashkenazi genetics have played a critical role in the development of modern genetic testing, benefiting not just their own community, but medical science as a whole. Yet, despite all this, Their genetic journey is still unfolding. As science advances, new discoveries continue to reshape what we know about the Ashkenazi Jewish lineage. Each breakthrough brings fresh insights, not just about their past, but about the very nature of human evolution, migration, and survival itself. Language is more than just words. It's a reflection of history, culture, and identity. For the Ashkenazi Jews, their language became a bridge between past and present, a symbol of resilience in a world that constantly tried to erase them. That language was Yiddish. But Yiddish is more than just a dialect. It's a linguistic time capsule, carrying within it the story of an entire people's migration, survival, and adaptation. Yiddish didn't originate in the Middle East, nor did it emerge purely from the lands of Europe. Instead, it was born from the unique journey of the Ashkenazi Jews as they moved through different regions, absorbing and blending the languages they encountered. The earliest forms of Yiddish appeared around the 9th or 10th century, when Jewish communities living in the Rhineland region of present-day Germany began speaking a dialect that mixed Middle High German with Hebrew and Aramaic elements. But Yiddish was never static. As Ashkenazi Jews migrated eastward into Poland, Lithuania, and Russia, their language absorbed Slavic influences, creating the rich and complex linguistic tapestry that we recognize today. Unlike many other Jewish languages, which remained closely tied to religious texts, Yiddish developed as a spoken language of everyday life. It was the language of merchants negotiating trade, of families telling stories, of poets capturing the joys and sorrows of Jewish existence. It was deeply intertwined with Ashkenazi identity, serving as a cultural anchor even as Jewish communities found themselves in vastly different countries, with vastly different rulers. While Jews in Spain spoke Ladino, and those in the Middle East spoke Judeo-Arabic, Yiddish became the defining language of the Ashkenazi world. But language is never just about communication, it's about survival. Yiddish played a crucial role in keeping Ashkenazi Jewish culture intact despite centuries of displacement and persecution. It created a sense of unity among Jews scattered across Europe, allowing them to maintain their traditions even in foreign lands. It also served as a protective barrier, an internal code that preserved Jewish life and knowledge in times of danger. In shtetls, the small Jewish towns that dotted Eastern Europe, Yiddish was more than just a language. It was the heartbeat of an entire way of life. Despite its importance, Yiddish was often seen as a language of the marginalized. It was not the language of scholars or religious elites, who preferred Hebrew for sacred texts. Instead, it belonged to the common people, the shopkeepers, the tailors, the wandering storytellers. Yet, within it lay a literary tradition that would later flourish into one of the richest cultural movements in Jewish history. Yiddish literature, theater, and poetry became powerful expressions of Ashkenazi identity, capturing both the hardships and humor of Jewish life. In the late 19th and early 20th centuries, Yiddish reached its peak, with millions of Ashkenazi Jews spread across Eastern Europe, Russia, and even North America. Yiddish newspapers, novels, and plays flourished. Writers like Sholem Aleichem and Isaac Bashevis Singer immortalized Jewish life through their works, ensuring that the language carried not only the voices of the past, but also the stories of a rapidly changing world. But then came the Holocaust, a tragedy that didn't just take lives, but also threatened to erase an entire cultural heritage. Entire Yiddish-speaking communities were wiped out, and with them, the linguistic heart of Ashkenazi Jewish life. In the years that followed, Yiddish struggled to survive. Many Jewish immigrants to the United States and Israel abandoned it in favor of English or Hebrew, seeing it as a reminder of the hardships of the past. By the mid-20th century, Yiddish was in decline, spoken mostly by older generations and a few ultra-Orthodox communities who continued to pass it down. Yet, against all odds, Yiddish has refused to disappear. Today, there is a revival, one fueled by scholars, artists, and musicians who recognize its cultural significance. Universities offer courses in Yiddish studies. Young Jewish activists reclaim it as part of their heritage, and Yiddish theater and music are once again finding audiences. What was once considered a dying language is now being embraced as a vital link to the past, a reminder that language, like identity, is something worth preserving. History has always been shaped by movement, by people forced to leave their homelands, by communities uprooted and scattered, and by cultures that had to adapt to survive. For the Ashkenazi Jews, history wasn't just written in books. It was written in the footprints they left behind as they moved from one land to another, searching for safety, opportunity, and a place to call home. But while their journey across continents is well documented, what often gets overlooked is how their very existence was shaped by the challenges they faced along the way. Unlike many populations that settled and remained in one place for generations, the Ashkenazi Jews lived a life of near-constant displacement. From medieval expulsions to forced migrations, they were rarely allowed the stability that other communities took for granted. Yet, instead of vanishing, they became one of the most enduring and influential Jewish groups in the world. This resilience was not accidental. It was a direct result of the historical forces that shaped them. In the 11th and 12th centuries, life in the Rhineland and other parts of Central Europe became increasingly dangerous for Jewish communities. The rise of religious intolerance, particularly during the Crusades, turned them into targets. Jewish neighborhoods were attacked, families were forced to flee, and entire communities were wiped out. Those who survived had two choices: stay and risk further violence, or move eastward in search of safety. Most chose the latter. This migration eastward into Poland, Lithuania, and Russia was not just a movement of people. It was the beginning of a new chapter in Ashkenazi history. In these lands, Jews were often welcomed for their skills in trade, finance, and administration. Unlike Western Europe, where they were forced into isolation, Eastern European rulers saw them as valuable contributors to the economy. Jewish communities grew rapidly, establishing towns, synagogues, and centers of learning that would become the heart of Ashkenazi culture. But history has a way of repeating itself. Just as they had been expelled from the West, the Ashkenazi Jews would soon find themselves facing persecution in the East as well. By the 17th century, the tides had turned. The Khmelnytsky uprising in Ukraine led to the massacre of tens of thousands of Jews, marking one of the darkest periods in their history. Once again, they were forced to move, seeking refuge in different parts of Europe, the Ottoman Empire, and eventually the New World. The 19th and early 20th centuries saw yet another wave of displacement. Rising anti-Semitism, pogroms, and restrictive laws in Russia and Eastern Europe forced millions of Ashkenazi Jews to leave their ancestral homes. Many set sail for the United States, where they built new communities in cities like New York, Chicago, and Philadelphia. Others migrated to Argentina, South Africa, and later, to British-controlled Palestine, laying the foundation for what would eventually become the State of Israel. What makes the Ashkenazi migration story so unique is that, despite centuries of upheaval, their identity remained intact. Wherever they went, they carried with them their traditions, their language, and their sense of community. They rebuilt their institutions, re-established their cultural practices, and found ways to thrive in unfamiliar lands. Their ability to adapt without losing their core identity is one of the reasons they remain such a distinct and influential group today. But migration wasn't just about survival. It also played a role in shaping Ashkenazi genetics. Each new wave of movement exposed them to different environments, diets, and even new diseases. Over time, these factors influenced their genetic makeup, reinforcing certain traits while eliminating others. This is why studying their migration patterns is not just about understanding history. It's about understanding how populations evolve and adapt over time. Even today, the legacy of Ashkenazi migration continues. Their descendants are spread across the world, from Israel to the United States, from Europe to South America. Each community tells a different story, yet all are connected by a shared past, one marked by struggle, endurance, and an unbreakable link to their ancestors. Genetics is often seen as a map, a guide that traces where we come from and how we got here. But for the Ashkenazi Jews, genetics is more than just a tool for understanding the past. It is a key to their distinct identity, a biological record of their survival, and a fascinating case study for scientists trying to unravel the complexities of human evolution. Their DNA carries unique markers that not only connect them to their ancient ancestors, but also reveal unexpected influences from the places they lived and the challenges they endured. One of the most striking aspects of Ashkenazi genetics is the unusually high level of shared ancestry within the community. Unlike many populations that have mixed freely over time, Ashkenazi Jews remained largely endogamous, marrying within their own group. This created a genetic signature that is remarkably consistent, even among Ashkenazi Jews living on opposite sides of the world today. In fact, genetic studies show that two random Ashkenazi individuals are often as closely related as fourth or fifth cousins, a level of genetic similarity rarely seen in other large populations. What makes this even more fascinating is how their genetic makeup reflects both continuity and change. While their paternal lineage, traced through the Y chromosome, connects them strongly to ancient Middle Eastern Jewish populations, their maternal lineage, traced through mitochondrial DNA, shows a different story. Many Ashkenazi maternal lineages can be traced to European women who, at some point in history, became part of the community. This means that while their Jewish identity remained firmly rooted in tradition, their genetics evolved through a blend of ancient and medieval influences. But genetics doesn't just reveal where people come from, it also shapes their present. One of the most studied aspects of Ashkenazi DNA is the presence of specific genetic mutations that have been passed down through generations. Some of these mutations are associated with inherited diseases, including Tay-Sachs disease, Bloom syndrome, and certain types of cancer linked to BRCA gene variants. These conditions appear at much higher rates in Ashkenazi Jews than in the general population, making genetic screening an essential part of modern healthcare for many within the community. However, not all genetic traits are tied to disease. Some scientists have explored whether certain genetic factors contributed to the intellectual and academic achievements of Ashkenazi Jews. Over the past few centuries, Ashkenazi Jews have produced an extraordinary number of Nobel Prize winners, mathematicians, and scholars. While cultural factors, such as a deep emphasis on education and literacy, play a significant role, researchers have also investigated whether genetic influences might have played a part in shaping cognitive abilities over time. Though the debate remains open, what is clear is that Ashkenazi Jews developed a distinct genetic and intellectual legacy unlike any other group in history. One of the most exciting aspects of modern genetic research is how it continues to uncover new insights about the Ashkenazi Jewish lineage. Advances in DNA sequencing have allowed scientists to trace their ancestry with remarkable precision, confirming links to ancient Jewish populations while also identifying genetic patterns that connect them to historical migrations. These discoveries are not just important for Ashkenazi Jews. They provide valuable information about human genetics as a whole, helping scientists understand how populations change, adapt, and survive over time. Yet, as genetics provides answers, it also raises new questions. How much of identity is written in DNA, and how much is shaped by culture and history? Can genetics alone define a people, or is it simply one piece of a much larger puzzle? For the Ashkenazi Jews, their genetic journey is not just about biology. It's about resilience, adaptation, and an unbroken connection to their past. Every community carries the marks of its past, not just in traditions and stories, but in the very structure of its DNA. But genes don't just preserve ancestry. They also carry the traces of struggle, adaptation, and survival. For the Ashkenazi Jews, history was not just something recorded in books. It was something written into their genetic code. And no aspect of their history shaped that code more profoundly than the extreme challenges they faced over centuries. From the earliest days of their settlement in Europe, the Ashkenazi Jews were subjected to waves of persecution, forced expulsions, and violence. Unlike many populations that remained in stable homelands, they lived under constant threat, often targeted simply for existing. This instability had an unexpected consequence. It shaped their genetic makeup in ways that scientists are only now beginning to fully understand. One of the most defining factors in their genetic history was the repeated cycle of near destruction and regrowth. Each time a community was wiped out or displaced, the surviving population, often a much smaller group, became the genetic foundation for future generations. Over time, this process reinforced certain inherited traits while eliminating others, creating a highly distinct genetic profile. Perhaps the most devastating event that reshaped the Ashkenazi Jewish gene pool was the Holocaust. The near erasure of millions of people didn't just leave an emotional and cultural wound. It also altered the genetic diversity of the population. Before World War II, Ashkenazi Jews were spread across Europe in large, thriving communities. After the war, the survivors represented only a fraction of what had once been a vast and diverse gene pool. This created another genetic bottleneck, further reinforcing the patterns that had already been established through centuries of isolation and persecution. But genetics is not just about loss, it's also about survival. Despite facing unimaginable hardships, the Ashkenazi Jews preserved their identity, passing down not just their traditions, but also their biological legacy. Their ability to endure in the face of constant displacement allowed them to maintain an unbroken genetic lineage that stretches back over 1,000 years. Modern science has given us the ability to trace how these historical struggles influenced their genetic makeup. The high frequency of certain inherited traits within the Ashkenazi population is a direct result of their history of survival under extreme conditions. These genetic markers serve as evidence of the hardships their ancestors endured and the resilience that allowed them to rebuild again and again. Identity is more than just ancestry. It is shaped by culture, language, traditions, and the way a community defines itself. For the Ashkenazi Jews, their genetic uniqueness is only part of the story. Equally significant is the culture they built, the traditions they preserved, and the way they maintained a strong sense of belonging even in times of displacement and persecution. More than just a people with shared DNA, they are a civilization that carried its identity across borders, centuries, and challenges. One of the most remarkable aspects of Ashkenazi Jewish culture is its ability to evolve without losing its core. Whether in medieval Germany, the shtetls of Poland, or the immigrant neighborhoods of New York, their traditions remained intact. From religious practices to culinary habits, from literature to music, their way of life adapted to new environments while staying deeply connected to its roots. This cultural resilience was key to their survival. It gave them continuity when everything else was uncertain. At the heart of Ashkenazi identity is a dedication to scholarship. For centuries, education was not just encouraged but seen as essential to Jewish life. Religious study, particularly of the Talmud, became a central pillar of their culture. Even outside of religious settings, literacy and intellectual pursuits were valued highly. This emphasis on knowledge helped them navigate societies where they were often excluded from mainstream professions. Denied land ownership in many parts of Europe, they turned to fields that required intellect and adaptability: finance, medicine, law, and academia. But Ashkenazi culture wasn't solely built on study. It was also rich in storytelling, humor, and artistic expression. Yiddish literature captured the struggles and joys of Jewish life, reflecting the wit and resilience of a people who found ways to laugh even in the darkest times. Music, too, played a crucial role. Klezmer, a genre of folk music developed in Eastern Europe, became a defining sound of Ashkenazi celebrations and continues to influence musicians around the world today. Food was another marker of identity. Traditional Ashkenazi cuisine developed from necessity, shaped by the climates and economic conditions of the regions where they lived. Dishes like gefilte fish, borscht, and challah weren't just meals, they were cultural symbols, passed down through generations. Even today, Ashkenazi food remains a strong link to the past, connecting modern Jewish communities to their ancestors. Despite all attempts to erase them, the Ashkenazi Jews held onto their culture with remarkable determination. Their customs, values, and creative expressions have left an impact far beyond their own community, influencing literature, science, and the arts on a global scale. More than just a population with a shared genetic history, they are a testament to the power of culture in preserving identity across centuries. Science has given us powerful tools to explore the past, but sometimes it reveals more than we ever expected. The genetic research into the Ashkenazi Jews has not only confirmed their deep ancestral connections, but has also led to groundbreaking discoveries that extend far beyond their own history. The study of their DNA has helped scientists understand human migration, inherited diseases, and even the broader evolution of genetic traits across populations. One of the most significant contributions of Ashkenazi genetic research has been in the field of medicine. Because their population went through extreme genetic bottlenecks, certain mutations became highly concentrated. While some of these mutations are associated with diseases, their consistency within a defined population has allowed researchers to study genetic disorders with greater precision. In fact, genetic screening programs developed to detect conditions like Tay-Sachs disease and BRCA-related cancers have saved countless lives, not just among Ashkenazi Jews, but among people of all backgrounds. The same research techniques are now being used to study rare diseases in other populations, making Ashkenazi genetics a key reference point in modern medical advancements. Beyond medicine, their genetic markers have played a crucial role in tracing human migration patterns. By comparing Ashkenazi DNA with that of other populations, scientists have been able to map out historical movements with stunning accuracy. This has helped confirm not only their origins, but also the paths they traveled over centuries. It has even provided insights into how different populations interacted, revealing genetic links between groups that were previously thought to have little connection. Perhaps one of the most intriguing areas of study is how genetic traits evolve in response to historical pressures. Scientists have long debated whether certain cognitive abilities, resistance to diseases, or even metabolic adaptations are linked to specific genetic factors. Research into Ashkenazi genetics has opened new discussions on how intelligence, longevity, and other traits might be influenced by both genetics and environment. While the topic remains complex and controversial, there is no denying that their unique genetic history offers a rare opportunity to study how populations change over time. But genetic research also comes with ethical challenges. As scientists uncover more about ancestry and inherited traits, important questions arise. Should genetic identity define a person's cultural belonging? How should communities handle the implications of genetic testing, especially when it comes to health risks? And perhaps most importantly, how do we ensure that genetics is used as a tool for knowledge rather than division? These are debates that will continue as genetic science advances, but one thing is clear. The study of Ashkenazi DNA has reshaped how we understand human history, genetics, and even the future of medicine. The study of genetics has unlocked extraordinary insights into human history, but it has also raised profound questions about identity, belonging, and the future. For the Ashkenazi Jews, the revelations of genetic research are not just about ancestry. They are about what it means to carry the past within us and how science can shape the future of an entire community. Their genetic legacy is more than a record of where they came from. It is a story of endurance, adaptation, and the deep connections between history and biology. As genetic science continues to advance, new discoveries about Ashkenazi ancestry are still being made. Research has confirmed that their lineage is one of the most distinct in the world, yet it also carries traces of interactions with other populations. Each breakthrough deepens our understanding of how communities evolve, how genes are preserved across generations, and how historical events leave lasting imprints on DNA. With each study, we learn more about how populations like the Ashkenazi Jews maintained their heritage despite centuries of upheaval. But genetics is not destiny. While DNA can tell us about our origins, it does not define culture, beliefs, or individual identity. The Ashkenazi Jewish story is not just about genetic markers or inherited traits. It is about the traditions, knowledge, and resilience that have been passed down through generations. It is about the ability of a people to preserve their identity, not just through biology, but through faith, language, and an enduring sense of community. Perhaps the greatest lesson their genetic journey offers is that survival is not just a matter of chance. It is a result of adaptation, unity, and the strength to rebuild again and again. Their history is a testament to the power of continuity, showing that even in the face of persecution, displacement, and near destruction, identity can endure. As science moves forward, the ethical implications of genetic research remain important. How should these discoveries be used? What does it mean for people who share genetic heritage, but live vastly different lives today? And how do we balance the incredible power of genetic knowledge with the need to ensure that it is never used to divide, but to educate and connect? These are questions that will continue to be explored as we learn more about our past and our shared human history. The story of the Ashkenazi Jews is far from over. It is a story that continues to be written, not just in genes, but in the traditions that persist, the communities that thrive, and the knowledge that is passed down. Their past is preserved in their DNA, but their future is still theirs to shape.